Welcome to everybody to this panel on violations in Turkish-occupied northern Syria, potential pathways for justice and accountability. This panel was organized by Human Rights Watch, by Syrians for Truth and Justice, which is a independent organization based out of Europe, which closely monitors human rights abuses in Syria and has an extensive network inside Syria and produces magnificent work, as well as a Synergy, which is also based in Syria, a victim association that works on documenting violations committed by the Turkish forces and their proxies in the zones that they occupy in northern Syria. So 6 years ago, in January 2018, the Turkish military and its allies invaded Afrin, which is a majority Kurdish enclave in northern Syria, causing massive displacement and committing numerous crimes that have been labeled war crimes and that have been documented extensively by Syrians for Truth and Justice, also by Synergy, and now laterally by Human Rights Watch, which just released an exhaustive report on what's going on in these areas, and not just in Afrin, but also in Ras al-Ayn, or Kaniyê as it's known, in Kurdish, which was occupied by Turkish forces in 2019 when the United States, Donald Trump was running the country at the time, greenlit Turkey's
recording in
operation.
progress.
And so it's been very hard for journalists to sort of document, to report on what's going on there, basically because we're not allowed into those areas. And I forgot to introduce myself. I'm chief correspondent for Al-Monitor based in London, and my name is Amber Zaman. So without much further ado, I'm going to give the floor to Heba, who is with Human Rights Watch, senior researcher for Human Rights Watch, who helped put together this really, really important report. Heba, can you please tell us what your findings are?
Yes, definitely. Thanks, Amber, and thanks to everyone for to STJ for organizing this panel. So yes, maybe first, I'll try to walk you through our recently published report. And in the process, hopefully, I'll be able to set the stage for my fellow panelists who, by generally speaking to the circumstances that have led to the Turkish presence in the region and its implications for the people of the region. And please, Amber, do let me know if I go over time. Yeah, I tend to do that. So basically, our report, it's a 70-page report that documents abductions, arbitrary arrests, unlawful detentions, sexual violence and torture by the various factions of a loose coalition of armed groups that is backed by Turkey, called the Syrian National Army. And this is happening in areas that are now, that we consider occupied by Turkey. We're talking about 2 non-contiguous strips of land or territories of land in northern Syria that are currently under the occupation of Turkey, and is and where this loose coalition known as the Syrian National Army operates alongside Turkish armed forces and Turkish intelligence agencies on the ground. So this, so our report kind of goes into the background, goes into, how these invasions took place, the fact that every single one of these invasions since 2016, so the first one was in 2016, in which, Turkish armed forces conducted a ground invasion into northern Syria. The second was in 2018 when they captured Afrin, and the third in 2019 when they captured a narrow strip of land between Abyad and Ras al-Ayn, and that includes both of those. So in both of those areas, and we chose Afrin and Ras al-Ayn as as examples of these issues that are taking place across the regions that are currently under Turkish occupation. So it's not, while the abuses that we document, people that we spoke to, mostly are from or have faced these issues in Serê and Afrin, it is reflective of the general lawlessness and insecurity that exists in these territories. So the report, documents detention-related abuses, and I'm going to get into those a little bit, and then also violations of housing, land, and property rights. So we're talking about widespread looting, pillaging. This is again towards the beginning or towards the end of each of the invasions. So at the start, as well as, property seizures, extortion that continues until this day. And then we finally look at basically the abject failure of most of the attempted accountability measures that were introduced in recent years to try and curb these abuses or to provide restitution to victims. And so, and also here, I want to just kind of situate this within the larger context. In Syria now, we've got 4 zones of control, one of which is Turkish-occupied territories. In all of these zones of control, we see criminality, lawlessness, extortion, abuses that are really driven by the need for profits, the seeking of profit, and it's the same thing in Turkish-occupied territories, and I think. It may arguably be one of the most dangerous areas currently, and I'll get a bit into why that is, and at the moment. But basically, the top lines of our report really are that Turkey bears responsibility for the serious abuses and potential war crimes that are committed by members of its own forces, but also by local armed groups that it supports, because it is the occupier. So it has the obligation to make sure that these areas are safe and that they are thriving. And that's not what's happening. So the second, top line point here that we introduced, that I think is kind of maybe, let's say, a newer thing to introduce in our report, as opposed to older or past research and documentation, because there's been a lot of documentation, including by some of our fellow panelists, and also, the Commission of Inquiry on Syria. They've done a lot of reporting on some of these areas. But so the second top line is really that Turkish officials are not merely bystanders to these abuses. They bear responsibility, as the occupying power, but also have been directly involved in apparent war crimes in some of these instances, in what Turkey, would like to call or would like to frame as a safe zone. Right, so it calls these areas that it's captured safe zones where Syrian refugees can voluntarily return or not, and where they can create a buffer zone between them and what they consider PKK affiliated Kurdish groups. So our report relies on interviews with 58, survivors, victims, relatives, and witnesses of violations, as well as representatives of, NGOs, journalists, activists, researchers, and, 2 informed sources who have direct engagement and at some point had oversight over some of these detention centers. And maybe now I'll get into some of the background.
Yeah,
so
that gives us a good sort of frame for what the report is about, and then we can get into some more of the details. But I would like to now turn to Navroz Rasho, who is a Kurdish journalist based in northeastern Syria, and who is a correspondent for the Voice of America. And she was displaced from Afrin, and she's on the ground reporting, and that's really a brave thing to do, because we know the threats that reporters face from Turkey and from its allies. And please, over to you, Navroz. Tell us what you have been observing on the ground, and also what you're hearing from your family, from your friends, from your contacts in Afrin, and how easy is it really to access this information? Navroz?
نعم، شكرا أمبرين، شكرا لكل القائمين، شكرا سوريون من أجل الحقيقة والعدالة Human Rights Watch وتآزر لتسليط الضوء، وتحديدا كما تعلمون اليوم هو 18 ويصادف الذكرى السنوية السادسة للسيطرة التركية على منطقة مدينة عفرين.
The occupation of Afrin. This report is beautiful. It spotlights a lot of details, the violations types which the people of Afrin have been witnessing and exposed to. The last incident I would like to talk about was, which has been because of what this situation Turkey had created with its backed allies, factions, as well as their continuous practices. Khalid's child who had lost his life days ago after he'd been stabbed, and then after he was thrown into the well. This incident represents hundreds of stories in Afrin. We've been witnessing this from about 6 years, and this is happening in all the walks of life. This child who lost his life, he was killed just because he's Kurdish. He represents this situation in Afrin since 6 years. Since 6 years, we can kill any person from the natives, the people who still who stayed in the area, and there have been 250,000 people displaced after the occupation of Turkey. And this story represents hundreds of stories of victims who have been killed, tortured, forced disappeared, or displaced just because they were Kurds. In March for the Kurds means a lot. Today, for the people of Afrin, this is the Freedom Day. March, the Kurds are killed at March in this month by this status quo, which has been the result of the occupation, while we are celebrating March or Azar. In the testimony of the mother of this Ahmed Afrini's mother, she speaks about this in the social media. She said, I would not go to the court. Why? Because she believes in justice. And through this workshop, we want to spotlight this. She said, I would not go to the courts which we have today, the courts which have been created by Turkey and the de facto forces there, including the coalition, the Syrian coalition. Why? Because I don't believe that they are going to be fair. And she sees that they are lies. And the mother of Ahmed Afrini, the child who was another victim, also, this is another story which is added to hundreds of stories of women who are suffering from the lack of justice, while there are so many types of violations they have been exposed to. The mother of Ahmed said, where is this justice which the people of Bashmart have witnessed? Those who have lost 4 of the family in Nairuz, and this was last year in 2023, and this was before the earthquake which had been witnessed in the north, and the damage it had caused in Junderis. This family have been exposed as well to be killed on the hands of the officials, as well as people who are closely linked to the armed forces controlling Junderis. This incident had caused for people to be killed at the Nowruz night. This had left the impression in the imagination of every Afrini, everyone inside Afrin. This is a memory, which Nowruz was a celebration time. Now it's a memory of death, fear, terror, and this is like people now are afraid of practicing their normal life and celebrations, which the natives have lived before. The Bashmar families, Ahmed al-Afrini's mother, who have been killed by one of the people who have been brought from Turkey to Afrin to create what the Human Rights Watch had mentioned. There is this situation of destruction of the normal life in Afrin. The stories which we would like to indicate are endless. As you said, Ambreen, I say that I'm a correspondent daily. I see hundreds of stories, not just inside Afrin, but others. And the violations of Turkey are not just exclusively to Afrin, but to also those who have been displaced to the other areas which are only a few kilometers away from Afrin, where people live very harsh circumstances, where the harsh circumstances of not even the normally displaced people. So we cannot say that those violations and crimes, practices done by done under the umbrella of this occupation and the Turkish occupation and control as just the violations which you would see in the Human Rights Watch report. There are other unseen dimensions other than the ones mentioned in the report. Here, outside the HLB rights concerns and outside the also other types of normal violations, this is now like in Afrin, the situation is no different than the rest of the other areas occupied by Turkey. There are unseen circumstances or consequences. Before I mention those unseen circumstances or consequences for what is practiced there, first let me quote one of my friends who said, when he was describing Afrin, and he said, then I will describe the unseen dimensions. My friend said, when he was describing Afrin and the violations people are exposed to there, the situation of Afrin after 6 years of occupation and the Turkish de facto forces, they have full control of the area. They end, and the specificity of a community and the characteristics of a community which was there before the occupation, before the 20th of January 2018, the whole culture have become, or they are trying to change it to become Turkish, and they are enforcing this. Now they are also Arabizing the joints of life in addition to transforming this to Turkish. This means that they want to consume the families left who are just 30% today in Afrin. According to unofficial statistics,
I think
this
we'll
is not the real
there. We'll stop it there because
percentage of the Turks before Kurds before the Turkish occupation. So here we are talking about a full control and occupation of their life, not just the killing, not just the forced disappeared and the torture and imprisonment and also looting and extortion. No, it's not just that. Here we are talking about the mother of Khalid Afrini, who represents the rest of the women of Afrin. The mother of Khalid Afrini, she does not have safety. She's afraid for the rest of her children's life. She is afraid that they might be killed just because of this chaotic environment which has been created because of those practices in Afrin city. As I said, there are also other incidents in the rest of the northern parts of Syria. She's afraid of not having the justice the same way the women of the family of Bishmar didn't receive justice.
So Navrouz, I'm going to have to stop you there because we have limited time, and I'm going to come back to you to ask you about women in particular who I think are suffering the brunt of the abuses, particularly those who have been disappeared, abducted, tortured, raped in detention. We can talk about that, cultural destruction, the olive trees. There's so much more to say, but I would now like to turn to Izzadin, who is tracking what's happening in Ras al-Ayn. And of course, there too, you have massive abuses that have been not already labeled as war crimes by the United Nations, and in some cases also by the United States. So Izzadin, can you give us a sort of overview of the Turkish occupation, how that looks in Serê in Ras al-Ayn, please?
Thanks, Ambreen. I will speak in Arabic, and I will be speak slowly for the translation. مساء الخير وشكرا جميعا.
Thank you very much. Good evening. In short, I will not talk about the types of violations which we face in North Syria, which have been occupied by Turkey, because the Human Rights Watch report and the other defenders reports, the women's or Syrians organizations, and also the UN agency talk about this in detail. However, I'll talk about the consequences of the violations, the reasons for this, for the continuation of those violations, as well how to mitigate and minimize this, and how to hold the perpetrators accountable. To start with a small example, this is Ras al-Ayn Kaniyê, which has been occupied after the operation, which was called the Spring of Peace, and this was in 2019. This city, which has been occupied by a mixture of ethnicities, religions, Kurds, Arabs, Syriac, Armenians, Muslims, Christians, Yazidis. This city, because of the occupation by Turkey, now, today, over 85% of the inhabitants of this city are displaced, forced displaced. Why? Because the violations which have been committed after the olive branch in Afrin have pushed the people to move and leave the areas. And this was after the military occupation, because they were afraid that some violations will touch them. Although Ras al-Ayn's people or inhabitants were not just Syrian Kurds. After this operation, and because the people who came back to their area have been exposed to also other violations, and because they have been threatened, because the Syrian Kurds have been blackmailed, extorted, and threatened, and they have been pushed again to leave their area, and because of the other violations done against the rest of the components of the area, the Arabs, the Syriacs, the Armenians, the Yazidis also have been exposed to same violations. Even the Turkmens and the Circassians and Chechens have been exposed to the same. Now, this city, which used to have a mixture of different components, now is of one color. The Kurds percentage used to be almost half of the inhabitants of the city. Today, you don't have more than 45% in Ras al-Ayn, which is less than 10 people of Yazidis, Armenians, and Syriacs. This is why, because of the violations which have been committed and which continue in those areas. Why those violations are happening? Because of, now, in my own opinion, they're happening because, first, there is impunity, and there is no mechanism to bring back justice to the victims. As the Human Rights Watch report had mentioned, the government of Turkey and the officials were not just witnessing these violations happening, they participated actively. They were the ones doing this hand in hand with the Syrian National Armed Forces. Why? Because, as it's known, Turkey is managing the services, the administration of the also the Ras al-Ayn, al-Abyad, the areas of the Spring of Peace, and this is run by Shanli Orfa and by the governor of Turkey. And on the other side, the Syrian National Army itself received their orders from the Turkish forces and also the Turkish intelligences, who have created operation rooms, including Ras al-Ayn and al-Abyad, who direct their orders directly to the Syrian National Army's leaders. Turkey's intervention and having military bases and having high-level officials managing the Syrian National Armed Forces, funding them, makes them partner in those crimes, and this support was what created this image or this impunity for the Syrian National Army. They know that no one would hold them accountable for what they're doing, and this is why the situation has exacerbated in regard to the violations, in my own opinion. And the continuous documentation of those violations, the continuous attempts to held them accountable are the most important to mitigate those. And in previous Augustus, we've seen that American Treasury's sanctions against two of the factions, the Sultan Suleiman Shah and Al-Hamzat armed forces, have been under American sanctions because of that. And this was a clear message that there is no impunity. In 2022, also there was also the American Treasury's sanctions against the Ahrar al-Sharqiyya and also the leaders of the Eastern liberals leaders. And that's why this continuous documentation, tracing of those gathering evidence about the perpetrators and the crimes, the same way we've seen the case which the STJ done in the CCHR when we presented this to the Attorney General of Germany to investigate those crimes committed in Afrin and East Syria. To continue to do this as defenders, as Syrian NGOs, whether also Syrian or international NGOs, gathering enough evidence to intricate those, whether through the universal jurisdiction or through the UN agencies like the international, the IIIM, are the only ways to monitor what is happening, to document what's happening in enough manner to take the perpetrators into courts. In short, and to end, when there is this feeling that you are impune, they are not going to be punished, this would mean that the perpetrator would do more crimes. And when there is accountability, when there is monitoring, when they feel that they might be held accountable for every crime they've done, then this means that the violations are going to be minimized, and this would lead to mechanisms of getting fair justice for the victims. Thank you, and apologies for being long.
No, not at all, Izzadeen, and congratulations for the amazing work that your association Synergy does. Again, takes a lot of courage, and I'll be asking you more questions about how you actually do that work. But now I'd like to turn to Helena Kruger, who is a lawyer and a legal advisor in the International Crimes and Accountability Program at the European Centre for Constitutional and Human Rights, that just lodged a case together with Syrians for Truth and Justice, seeking some kind of accountability. Is this pie in the sky? Is this a fool's errand? And based on what you've just heard during this panel about the lack of accountability, do you think that justice can actually be served in these cases?
Hi, everyone, and thank you very much for having me. So I want to briefly describe to you the case and the context in which the criminal complaint, in which we as ECCHR, together with the help of SDJ, are asking the German federal prosecutor to investigate crimes committed by Turkish-backed armed groups against the Kurdish population in northern Syria. So we have submitted this complaint in Germany in mid-January this year after 6 years of ongoing violence, as you have heard. 6 years after the military operation Olive Branch had started, which marks also the beginning of the material time of our complaint. And the criminal complaint addresses the human rights violations that those Islamist armed militias have been committing in the northern Syrian region of Afrin since January 2018, with the knowledge also and the support of Turkey. These crimes, as we allege, include persecution and displacement of the predominantly Kurdish civilian population, the violent repression also of the population through detention and torture, targeted killings, and destruction of cultural heritage sites. And these atrocities were committed by various militias in the region, but under the umbrella of the Syrian National Army, the SNA, briefly. And in the complaint, ECCHR and STJ are supporting 6 survivors of these international crimes. And to give you some background on why we're doing this. For more than 10 years now, ECCHR has been working relating to Syria and where it has focused on crimes perpetrated by the Assad regime. This began in 2012 with supporting survivors in contributing to ongoing investigations. Then from 2016, transitioned into the development, more of a large-scale strategic legal intervention before national prosecuting authorities. And through this effort, significant momentum was built with regards to accountability efforts, giving rise to arrest warrants and the first trials also against the regime. However, particularly in the Syrian context, we see that international justice is selective. And in light of this, ECCHR then began looking into patterns of crimes and perpetrators that have largely been neglected, despite the large and very emblematic impact their very unlawful conduct has had on the conflict. So the main objective of this complaint was to pursue accountability for crimes committed by a very wide range of actors in the context of the ongoing conflict in Syria, and particular to shine light on the role of some powerful actors that are to this day acting with impunity. So our complaint alleges both war crimes and crimes against humanity, and we allege that militias have engaged in arbitrary arrests, torture, enforced disappearances, killings, sexual violence, as well as forced displacement, expulsion, and pillaging of property, also against the local Kurdish population. All of this was done in an effort to change the demographic composition in the region. And now you might wonder why we submitted the complaint in Germany, and the reason is that those serious crimes like those, they concern the international community as a whole and must be responded to, of course. And for this reason, it is the duty of all national jurisdictions and states like Germany to investigate the serious crimes committed in Syria and to also prosecute them, prosecute those who are responsible for them. And under the principle of universal jurisdiction, Germany can prosecute those international crimes, regardless of who committed them, where they were committed, and against whom also they were directed. Germany has in the past played a very pioneering role, I may say, in addressing, for example, the crimes of the Syrian regime in the landmark al-Khatib trial. There's also an ongoing structural investigation in Germany for international crimes committed, especially by members of non-state armed groups in Syria and Iraq as well. But in this investigation, evidence is being collected and preserved before then being processed into a more individual investigation. And the complaint now filed with the German federal prosecutor argues and demands that this structural investigation should be expanded to include crimes committed by Turkish-backed groups in northern Syria, as well as to also issue arrest warrants and against those individuals responsible for the crimes committed against the civilian population in the region. And yes, then to make possible a prosecution of high-level suspects in the militia leadership. And so in our complaint, we have named 6 perpetrators from the 4 most notorious militias operating under the umbrella of the SNA. And we say that those 6 people are responsible because they are some of the direct perpetrators that have also been named by our witnesses. And maybe to add and describe a bit the difficulties the team has encountered in the process, it was quite difficult to identify those perpetrators because very often they use nicknames or fighting names, and yes, so this can be an issue. But with the complaint now, we have submitted evidence, and the complaint provides testimony from direct witnesses to the crime. It also provides a very wide description of the crimes that I mentioned, and particularly we connect the dots and explain which witnesses have been subjected to which crimes. And in doing this, of course, we are very careful not to identify any of the survivors until they might be called to testify. And our goal, of course, would be to achieve an issuance of international arrest warrants against any high-level perpetrators. So whenever those people start traveling, they can be arrested very easily. And lastly, I wanted to stress that criminal complaints like this can be very impactful. We have seen this in Germany in the past, and at the same time, of course, we wanted to show that survivors, that somebody cares and that the crimes committed are not being ignored. Yes,
Well,
thank you very much
for that sort of overview of the very important work that you're doing on the accountability end of things. But let's look at the realpolitik aspect of all of this. And for that, I will turn to Gabriel Young, who's an investigator at the Syria Justice Accountability Center, which is based in Washington, D.C., if I'm not mistaken. And he's also completing his PhD in Middle Eastern Studies and History at New York University. So, Gabriel, I mean, it's all well and good to seek justice, but we're talking about Turkey, an extremely important country that's a member of the NATO alliance. And at this particular time, given what's going on in Ukraine, in Gaza, great power competition, generally, attention has once again refocused on Turkey's strategic importance, which partly explains the reason why, for example, the United States Congress has decided to ease some of the military sanctions on Turkey, some of which were imposed specifically because of these violations that it committed or oversaw in northern Syria. How optimistic are you that there will be a pursuit of justice when it comes to Turkey? Because we're talking about the militias, the proxies, okay, and arrest warrants for their travel, etc. But these people don't really travel internationally. What real leverage is there that can be brought to bear on the proxies and, as I said, against Turkey itself, which is ultimately responsible?
Sure. Thank you, Ambryn, for the questions, and thank you to Sima for organizing this event and to the rest of the team at Syrians for Truth and Justice. So to respond to your question about the political landscape and how it bears on the legal accountability pathways, I think if we start locally and then build up from there, it's easier to understand what the dynamics are and how they're affecting the options that are theoretically available. If you think about what options are available on the ground in areas of occupied Syria, as Nowruz mentioned in her remarks, the legal mechanisms are uneven at best. Some courts may be responsive to individual criminal and civil complaints that are brought by residents in places like Afrin, Aziz, Jarablus. But in other cases, we see that there is clear impunity, most clearly, for instance, with the ruling by the military court in al-Ayn, which recently, as of January, I think, released 3 of the 4 individual members of the SNA who were involved in the killing of 4 Kurdish civilians in Nowruz I believe in 2023. And released 3 of them on basically, or convicted them with only 3 to 4 years of jail time and let one go altogether. Now, what's unfortunate is that given the fact that there are legal mechanisms formally in place within areas of Turkish-occupied Syria, and that in some cases, Syrians are being taken to Turkey for prosecution there, including most recently in the case of al-Abi, who was held for a year in Turkey on charges of spying. Unfortunately, in a sense, it is good he was recently released as of earlier this month. At the same time, this can make it hard to make the argument for instance, filing a complaint in the European Court of Human Rights, because you could argue that in fact there are legal remedies available locally, and that they haven't been necessarily exhausted by residents living under the control of Turkey and its proxies. And we even have collected documentation that indicate that within the areas controlled by the NSA that we're covering, such as areas as Azez and Afrin and Jarablus, the death sentences that have been issued by both military and civilian courts by the SNA over the years of their control many of them have not been implemented actually, and there's indications that there's probably some hesitations by Turkish authorities to allow these sentences to be carried out, which again indicates that there is some kind of legal process at work, which would again make it difficult to make the argument in a setting such as the European Court of Human Rights that local legal remedies have not been carried out. When we think about the option for instance, prosecuting some of the members of the SNA who have acquired Turkish citizenship, for instance, including Saif Balud Abu Bakr from, I believe, al-Hamzat, you would want to see, for instance, a partner organization in Turkey that'd be willing to pursue this kind of case. But I think the political climate in Turkey is actually less favorable for this than it may have been before the elections last year when Erdogan won re-election, and the pressure to take a hard line on the Syrian file in both positive and negative ways. For instance, in ordering the forced return of Syrians to Syria from Turkey, I think that pressure has lifted as a result of Erdogan securing re-election last year, and now the municipal elections in Turkey are almost over as well. So that pressure as well will be gone, and I think that Turkish rights organizations are concerned with opening space for the Turkish opposition to the AKP, not to necessarily pursuing a case on behalf of Syrians living under Turkish rule or ruled by Turkish proxies, which is unfortunate because, again, it limits the kinds of remedies that we could hope to achieve locally. Now, I'll say when it comes to European states, whether in the case of a universal jurisdiction case like the one that SDJ is pursuing with ECCHR, or with a case that could theoretically be brought to the European Court of Human Rights, if we could argue the legal remedies have been exhausted. This again goes to the political questions that you raised, Ambryn. The Turkey wields an immense amount of influence in the context of the current conflict with Ukraine. The fact that it just allowed for the accession of Sweden to NATO is a factor here, obviously, and the fact that Turkey is not actually pursuing normalization talks with the regime at this point anymore. I mean, those have really frozen as of 2022, 2023, again, because there is not the same pressure domestically within Turkey on Erdogan and the AKP to take this kind of stance and pursue normalization to ultimately return Syrian refugee populations. And so, I'd like to just end briefly by discussing the unilateral measures that are available to states, including through the use of sanctions. Azzedine referenced the sanction that the US imposed on Suleiman Shah and al-Hamzat in 2023. While these are perhaps the best that states can do in the absence of an ability or willingness to pursue legal cases against Turkey and its proxies, it's unclear what the effect that these sanctions are having on the behavior of these groups. I mean, certainly the SNA is aware and has responded publicly to the sanctions. There is indications that Turkey is rearranging forms of control over the SNA factions in response to the sanctions. I think that the best we can hope for from these sanctions is that they remove the worst actors in the occupation, such as Mohammed al-Jassim, bearing in mind that the occupation will continue, given that Turkey ultimately sees the occupation, although financially and politically costly, as a much better alternative to, again, the Syrian government reclaiming territory, resulting in further refugee outflows into Turkey, which is ultimately what I think Erdogan and the AKP are most concerned with. And I think this occupation will continue whether the AKP is in power or if the opposition takes power in a future election. So I think these are some of the political dynamics that we have to keep in mind when weighing the different legal pathways that are theoretically available to Syrians, both living in areas under Turkish occupation and in places such as Germany. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that overview. I'm not sure I completely agree with you on your last point that if the opposition came to power, that this occupation of northern Syria would continue. I think, first of all, you'd have less of an information vacuum because people in Turkey haven't the faintest clue what's really going on in those zones of occupation. Again, this speaks to the fact that no independent journalists are allowed to go in there and report on these violations. And whatever information that does come out tends to be characterized as propaganda, PKK propaganda, which is precisely why the work of Human Rights Watch, of STJ, is so very important. So coming back to you, Hiba, it must be very challenging at this particular time to draw attention to your report when such awful things are happening in Gaza and people are so, the public opinion is so desensitized, and, you know, more broadly, interest in the Syrian conflict has really subsided. So in this kind of environment, how do you get people to governments, your donors, the media, to pay attention, and also, you know, what kind of patterns have you established of violations that set this apart from, you know, what we're seeing elsewhere in the world? What is specific to Afrin, to Serê Kaniyê, of these violations happening under Turkish occupation?
Absolutely, thanks, Amber. And yes, I mean, it is absolutely incredibly difficult, especially at this moment and with what's going on in Gaza, to get people to care and to get governments to care. And not just that, but to kind of move past that glaring double standard that we see in the West when it comes to Israeli violations. It becomes very difficult for us to advocate on these other issues. And we're going to see, you know, and I think a lot of us, let's say, you know, my colleagues in the MENA division, in the Middle East and North Africa division at Human Rights Watch, I mean, we're all very worried about what's going on in Gaza and the West's reaction to that, how that's going to affect our ability to effectively do advocacy on any other country in the region or possibly elsewhere in the world. And so I'll tell you, I mean, the challenges are huge. You know, I think you have to work that much harder to try and get attention, to try and draw parallels. You know, and I think you can, to a certain extent, with, you know, between what's going on in Palestine and what's going on in Afrin and al-Ayn, you can draw a bit of a comparison there. You know, we've seen Turkey speak against the occupation of the Palestinian territories. We've, you know, at the same time as it is currently, exercising, you know, full administrative and military control over you know, territories of northern Syria. We see parallels in, you know, the cutting down of olive trees. I mean, when I hear Palestinians talking about, you know, witnessing 100-year-old and 200-year-old olive trees being cut down by, you know, Israeli forces, and I remember when I visited Syria and I was there and talking to people, you know, the pain in their eyes is the same, and it would, you know, it pained them the most when they spoke about that, you know, just brutal, careless cutting down of, you know, fruit trees and olive trees, and, you know, talking about Afrin, you know, how lush and how fruitful that place was, and what Turkey and its proxies have since done. So there are definitely parallels there that you can point towards. But our advocacy, for example, with the EU. So this let's say this report has been kind of the last piece of that puzzle of a body of work that we've been working on Human Rights Watch with colleagues in our refugees division and our Turkey researchers on Turkey being a safe third country, right? It's designated by the EU as a safe third country that you can be sending Syrian refugees that attempt to get to Europe back to Turkey. So we've done a lot of work on what happens inside Turkey, how some of these deportations are happening, the abuses that happen along those lines. But then this piece of the puzzle is kind of that final one where you've got Turkey saying that these areas are going to be safe zones, that they are areas that Syrians can return to. I mean, even if you put the security aspect aside, the lawlessness aside, economically, it's not a place you can send someone to live, to go back and live in a dignified manner. It's incredibly chaotic, and a lot of the times, and we'll get to that in terms of the uniqueness of the abuses. But basically, our advocacy with the EU remains the same, but we just added that final piece of the puzzle of why Turkey is not a safe third country in the country itself, and then in the occupied territories. That's where the people that you're sending are being sent back to. What are those areas like, right? And they are not safe. They are far from it, and that's kind of a piece of, let's say, a tranche of the advocacy that we're focusing on post report, right? Post putting out this report. In terms of the uniqueness of some of these abuses, and we've covered abuses in many places around the world, and I think you'll always be able to kind of draw parallels, especially when you've got a loose coalition, like we had said earlier, of armed groups that have absolutely no unified command structure, right? You've got each of the factions have their own emblem, their own flag. Each of them have kind of taken control of neighborhoods, of streets, it goes, as minuscule as at street level. You've got, Amshad taking over that street, and you've got, Sultan Süleyman Shah taking over that street, or Hamzat, or whatever. And so you've got this, situation, environment where people just have no clue how to navigate where is there any sort of rule of law or order that people can live by, and just to get to but what I think may be a unique aspect of this is, for example, in a lot of the cases that I've documented, Kurdish civilians are bearing the brunt of this, right? And people who have ties or have perceived ties, and that could be as simple as having lived in formerly SDF areas, right? To have perceived ties to these Kurdish groups, they are the ones that bear the brunt of the abuses. But then you also see that people are being extorted for money. No, not one person that I have spoken to, or one case that I have documented, if you've got the money to put up, you're released. So all of these very serious, accusations against these people. I think I've only documented 2 out of the 58 cases that we looked into that there were any actual convictions, and even then there was absolutely no due process. We're talking about military courts, and I think here to Gabriel's point, I think there is a way to argue that there is that due process is just not possible in the occupied territories, right? Especially when you look at military courts, there's absolutely none of that, no independence of lawyers, of the judges, of the entire process of how people get into the court system, the bribery, the extortion. It's so pervasive, and there's not even an expectation that there's going to be any sort of justice served. And like I said, I mean, that's the point, is that you see that a lot of that it's Kurdish citizens, Kurdish people and people who have ties that bear the brunt of it. But eventually, it comes down to criminality, and in that aspect, you know, Turkey, this kind of benefits you know, the Turkey's agenda in this area, which is to kind of weaken the Kurdish presence at whatever cost we're seeing. So yeah, so that's really where I would see that uniqueness in the abuses and how they're carried out.
Well, yes, very important to underline, to remind the audience why Turkey embarked on all of these operations. It's, as you say, first of all, there's an element of demographic engineering, of trying to thin the Kurdish population, ethnic Kurdish population along its borders, of disrupting contiguity between them, and inserting these Arab populations much in the same way that the Assad regime did, the Ba'ath regime did for long years. But turning to you, Nowroz, now, as I said, I want to talk to you, first of all, about the abuses that target women in particular, because we've heard some really awful stories. But I'd also like to talk to you about the insurgency in Afrin, because we know that there is an insurgency that's going on against the occupying forces there, that's being conducted by the Afrin Liberation Front, is that what they're called in English, and which is alleged to have links to the PKK. Can you tell us a little bit about those two elements, please?
نعم أمرين حقيقة حياة النساء داخل مدينة عفرين.
The life of women in Afrin and all the population of Afrin is up down, as you have mentioned, and my colleague are not restricted to women. It's not only arbitrary detention or violation of dignity, but also denying normal life. If we make comparison the life of women before 2018, after Turkish occupation, the life is, there is no woman life. Afrin were famous as a Syrian area led by women. But now, after 6 years of continuous violation, the normal life of women on the different levels, practicing normal life and to practice politics, to be involved in economy, and also to pass the heritage, non-material heritage, to the new generation, are all denied. Afrin, in the violation against Afrin is embodied in the violation against women. Before Turkish occupation, there were more than 3,000 women teaching Kurdish language in Afrin. Where are they now? Either in their household, incapable of practicing any work, they are not empowered, or maybe they are displaced in some other cases. Some of them are detained, difficult to reach them. There is a case that we witnessed, Zaliha case, something I cannot forget. She lost her temper and totally she has the mental problems, and she and her 5 kids were displaced. The violations are not restricted on material aspect only, but also I can say Afrin women now are witnessing relapse and sit back in practicing their rights and normal life. Today, the collective memory of women in Afrin, the grandmothers, the elderly women, what they have in their memories, they cannot teach their children the relation with olive trees, the love to the historical sites. They cannot teach this love to their granddaughters. because these women are either displaced or are forced to go to schools, teach Turkish language. Turkey is trying to reach in the number of 300,000 of Afrini speaking Turkish, not Kurdish. What is speaking of violation goes beyond the human rights, goes beyond property and residency. It's targeting everything that reach the limit of genocide, despite destroying the memories that women represent. It's genocide to everything related to women. I want to speak about Andara, which is a historical archaeological site, the oldest one, which there was Ashtar statue there. The memory of Afrin woman connected the site that was destroyed by the Turkish forces. Indeed, it was also a place to celebrate Nowruz for kids and men and women. What I want to say here, there is complete destruction of the identity by attacking women and general population, Yazidi, Alawite. The few Armenians who are left also displaced. Turkey, by the influential proxy battalions and existing authorities there, are working on details to make demographic changes. I can say also these crimes are equal to genocide. Unless the justice is served, these crimes will continue, and it has been already going on for 7 years. With regard to the insurgency, let me speak about violation that was not documented due to the difficulty to reach the media. In Sharra and Shirawa, in the southern countryside of Afrin, which is close to Afrin, I mean in the camps in Shahba region, there are 13 Turkish military bases. And not only the battalions are there, these bases were built on, and the olive oil, the olive tree were destroyed. And because these bases were built there, the civilians cannot go back. The tragedy is that Turkey is attacking the displaced people in the northern Aleppo. So even building Turkish military bases is attacking refugees, Kurdish IDPs. So all this violation by Turkey and the battalions is not aiming only to displace Kurdish, but to commit genocide in different ways, even using the fine power.
Can we talk a little bit about the insurgency, though, because we know so little about it, Nowruz. Could you tell us a little more about how effective it is? Who are these people, and what are their aims, and what is the Turkish response to this insurgency? But very briefly, please, because we're running out of time. We only have 25 minutes left, and I'd like to give the opportunity to others to also. So in 2 minutes, if you can. Thank you.
تركيا خلقت نموذج أو تريد خلق نموذج عفريني.
Turkey wants to give an example of oppressed Kurds who cannot protect their identity. But how can Kurds lead any insurgency against a state in NATO alliance? How can you get back your village with you should face the Air Force and different war machine that committed violation under its umbrella. There are some women and men called the Afrin Liberation Front or forces, men and women, and the aim is stop attacks against Kurds who are still on the border of Afrin, just few kilometers away from Afrin. From time to time, this Kurdish forces are trying to attack some Turkish bases. We have witnessed few operations, but it's not enough, or we cannot call it professional military operations. It can't change the reality or really target Turkey or end the Turkish occupation. It's not possible to change Afrin reality by forces that are poorly armed. Indeed, Afrin needs an international resolution, needs Syrian willingness to consider Afrin as Syrian territory. Not only Afrin, indeed, all the north part of Syria.
Thank you so much, Rose. Thank you so much for that. I will now turn to Izzedine again.
كامل المسؤولية عن هذه الانتهاكات وتأمين
So we hold responsible the Turkey for this violation, and civilians should have the right to go back to their territories because Kurds are Turkey is violating the rights of all Syrians, not only the Kurds, and they brought some people to replace Kurd in Afrin. It's like a cancer growing in the city of olive oil.
I'm sorry, I have to stop you there, Nowruz. I know there's so much more you want to say, and thank you so much. I want to turn to Izzedine now and talk a little more about Serê. Thank you. And I mean, my recollection is that there were quite a few people who left Serê when ISIS came in and took it. And those people have come back, I assume. And when I interviewed those people, they were very, very hostile to the United States, surprisingly, since they left because of ISIS and the United States was bombing ISIS, but they seemed very resentful of the United States and also of the Kurds. So my question to you is, how are relations between the Kurds who remained in Serê and the local Arab population, and how are the occupation forces managing those relations? Are they encouraging the hatred, polarization, and maybe applying pressure for the remaining Kurds to leave? What is it like there, and how safe is it really for Kurdish people in that region?
مساء الخير مرة تانية
Good evening again. I would like to thank all the speakers, males and females. In my own opinion, after the Spring of Peace and the Turkish occupation of Ras al-Ayn, this area, which had a mixture of ethnicities and religions, because of the practices of Turkey, as well as their backed allies or armed forces. Now, their main cause of what they did was to displace the Kurds, the native Kurds, and before Turkey, they want to have some Kurds, but few, and that's why out of 75,000 Kurds who have been living in Ras al-Ayn, Serê, Al-Abyad, now we only have 45 persons, not families, 45 individuals, most of which are elderly, men and women who are old. Those are the only ones left in Ras al-Ayn, Serê, of the Kurdish population. 45 individuals, 45, yes.
My goodness.
Out of
The first time
75,000.
I'm hearing that.
Yes, 45 out of 75,000.
Oh
Those
my
are the only
goodness.
Kurds left in Kaniyê.
Wow.
Only 2 Yazidis who are left in Kaniyê, and less than 10 Christians.
That's incredible, because when I went to Serê in 2013, I saw with my own eyes thousands of Kurds.
بالضبط.
Exactly. The Kurds in Kaniyê was more than 75,000 individuals. Turkey had tried, after the Spring of Peace operation, to not allow the forced displaced to come back. And the few who have tried to come back to their houses have been violated, have been exposed to violations, and they left. After that, Turkey had tried to bring back some Kurds to the area, some Yazidis and some Christians, just to show that they have achieved peace or safety, which they have promoted for. The attempts of Turkey have been through communicating with specific Kurdish leaders, community leaders, and they also said, you can be in official positions within the local councils of the Syrian interim government, or maybe they can have a leading role as community leaders. And this is through their proxies, through the Syrian National Army and through the local councils, which are under the umbrella of the Syrian interim government. This was not just the Turks, also the coexistence and the civil peace, which used to be in before in the Circassian area, have pushed so many Arabs and some other components who used to be in this area to try to come up with initiatives to mitigate first and the violations, and to bring back the rest of the Kurdish population as well as the other components. Nonetheless, those local initiatives were not successful as well. Why? Because the armed forces and the factions continued to perpetrate violations, and the few who could come back through initiatives, amongst of which the 2 Yazidis I told you about, they have talked about their testimonies to the fact-finding commission. They have been promised that they will come back and to their own properties, they will be safe. Nonetheless, they themselves have been exposed to violations. One Yazidi person, although he was promised by Turkey, although he has promised by the local councils that they will be safe, that they will get back their rights, real estate rights, this person could not get back his properties from Jaish al-Islam. And he was expelled from his house, his farm, from his village he used to live in. Why? Because for them, he's an infidel. He's not a Muslim.
I'm so sorry. I totally misunderstood when I didn't realize only 45. But another allegation that's been made by the Syrian Democratic Forces against Turkey is that it's allowing the Islamic State to use those regions under its occupation, and specifically places like Tel Abyad and Ras al-Ayn, to plot attacks against the SDF. Do you have any information that confirms those allegations, that supports them? And if you could wrap it up then, because we need to turn to our other speakers.
هذا الادعاء
This allegation is correct. In a large part of it. Why? Because of there are reports, there are documents which have proved in more than one time and in more than one event in the last few years that some people have been part of Daesh, have been targeted, and also leaders of Daesh who have been targeted in the areas of Turkey's occupation. We could document as well in Ras al-Ayn, Kaniyê, that today there are over 45 families, most of which women and children. Those are the families of the fighters of Daesh who are held in the areas or held by SDF. More than one report by the Turkish Anadolu agency have been published, which is that they have returned Iraqi refugees from Ras Al-Ayn and al-Abyad through the Iraqi consulate in Ankara or in Istanbul back to Iraq. These refugees, those who were in Sarikani and al-Abyad, I have read 2 reports about them. They have been returned. Over 200 people have been returned from those areas to Iraq. They themselves have been Iraqis from the fighters of Daesh, and the fighters either have been killed because of the military operations of the alliance against them, or they have been detained by SDF in northeast. And that's why this is a correct allegation, and the families of the fighters are still in the areas of the Turkish control area.
Thank you very much, Izzedine, for that clarification. And Helena, I would like to ask you, how much of your current work involves you having to interact with Turkish government officials? And is there is the German government contacting Turkish officials? Is there a kind of conversation, exchange of information that's going on? Are they being cooperative?
Thank you, Amberine. So I can only speak from ECCHR's point of view and relating to our work. So what we do is filing those criminal complaints and also, following a very victim-centered approach. So what we do is we research, we analyze the cases that we want to work on, and we talk to the witnesses about what they have gone through when the crimes have been committed. So we, as an NGO, we do not talk to any officials in a way, because it doesn't relate to our work, and adding to the complaint, it might even be counterproductive in achieving our goals. And to the part of which the German government is speaking to the Turkish politicians, I have no input on that, as the diplomat would also quite be very reluctant to openly speak about what they are talking or discussing with another NATO member or a close ally of theirs. Of course, on an advocacy perspective, we hope that Germany would emphasize their point of view with the Turkish officials, but we're not sure if they are doing it. There have been a lot of parliamentary statements, members of parliament that have been outspoken about the issue, but relating to the government, I really cannot say.
And what is the national mood in Germany like in general? Because we're hearing stories of now the Yazidis being told that they should not being granted residence in Germany after coming to Germany on the grounds that, well, Iraq is safe for them now, which of course we all know not to be true. So operating in that environment, I mean, how hopeful, I guess I'm sorry if I keep sounding so cynical, but how hopeful are you that you will get some results?
Yes, relating to the Yazidi questions, it's very unfortunate. I agree, because there has been a big contingent of refugees coming to Germany relating to that conflict, and everyone was very, very happy that Germany did this move. And now we see a lot of very contradictory work being done in that regard, which is unfortunate. And yes, regarding to the investigations that might come out of this complaint, We're not quite sure. We have received a reply that our complaint was received, but what will happen, there's no such thing as a formal initiation of an investigation. So we don't know yet what will happen next. But as I said, we're hopeful and trying to achieve the addition of our complaint into the structural investigations that are ongoing, and yes, the issuance of arrest warrants, hopefully.
And Gabriel, I mean, I put the same question to you. And who are you making your cases before? Are these members of Congress, State Department officials? How do you go about advocating on behalf of the victims of these abuses?
Well, I mean, we're not involved in any kind of universal jurisdiction cases the way that SDJ and US and ECC HR are. We did call for targeted sanctions of some of these groups within the SNA. You know, as we said, that was successful, and those sanctions were imposed. But I am pessimistic. I don't think that I mean, in the case of Germany, I also wonder post October 7th, the degree to which there is there's sympathy for pursuing cases that would be considered quite sensitive when it comes to the relationship between Germany and Turkey, and in which there's a very, very large migrant population. I mean, millions of German Turks, and the relationships between the two countries are quite strong. And I think that in the past 6 months, that relationship has only become more sensitive, in addition to the fact that we already discussed the context of the Ukraine war makes it very difficult, I think, to bring pressure against Turkey at the geopolitical level between states. And so for the time being, we're advocating, as I said, for unilateral measures that can at least make the occupation more in line with the international human rights law and human rights conventions that govern these occupations, as Hiba was saying in her remarks.
So final word will go to Sabiha Khalil, who is an activist originally from Afrin, and she would like to deliver a few comments before we close it. Please, Sabiha, over to you.
Thank you, Amberine, and all the panelists who has actually shared very precious, comments and interventions. My intervention actually will be directly to the most difficult issue that relates Turkey itself. To what extent is Turkey involved in such crimes inside Africa of Turkey? First of all, it couldn't be like this silly joke by Turkey that they came to fight PKK inside Syria is really, it is over, and nobody will believe them, since their main goal was actually to the demography inside Afrin, which actually has the dominant and the majority, its population was Kurds, mainly more than 25%. So right now, as mentioned from all the panelists, the population of Kurds right now doesn't exceed 25%. How Turkey is involved? Turkey from the very beginning itself organized, formed these, the so-called SNC, SNA, sorry. SNA itself is divided into many groups, like 50, 60, some would say more groups. Actually, each one has a name. as its own like territory, its own property that it takes control over it. So we can call it like a modern, a medieval fiefdom organized and supervised by Turkey. So in this way, when it comes to how much Turkey is involved, actually Turkey needs no evidence that it is directly involved. Let me give evidences. So just 2 weeks ago, Mustafa Masatli, who is the governor of Hatay, paid a supervisor visit to the so-called local Afrin, and they sat so cute around the table, and he at the head of the table, commanding them and instructing them. This is first. Second, just 2 days ago, the so-called Fahim Isa, who is the head of Sulaiman Shah Brigade, has officially been received in Ankara by Bahjat Dawlat Bahjali. Dawlat Bahjali, who is the head of the racist party in Turkey, who had also a military group called Jihad, which is the Grave Wolves. Yes, it's well known as a terrorist organization. So one of the head of the brigades who committed many crimes, thousands of crimes inside Afrin, is being received openly by one of the Turkish politicians. So this is also a question. Just yesterday, few Syrians, actually those who are displaced, proposed a delegation they thought could be the coalition delegation, but it comes to be the head of the Turkish intelligence, Ibrahim Kalin. So I think all of you knows who is Ibrahim Kalin. So what are those Turkish officials doing with those people inside Syria, whether receiving those who are acting aggressively inside Afrin? What are they doing so together? Are they just paying like relative visits, or are they arranging and planning how to carry out their ethnic cleansing against Kurds inside Afrin or in Serê Kaniyê? So obviously Turkey is involved in all crimes. Many actually detainees have been deported inside Turkey. They are now jailed inside Turkey. So this is also one evidence that Turkey is very much involved in these crimes. So concerning women, let me talk about women.
Can you,
women actually,
you have 1 minute, Samia.
1 minute, I should talk about women. Otherwise, this intervention wouldn't be complete.
Of course.
So women right now are being, I'm going to cover just those that has not been talking about. Women now are subject to different violations. Among them actually is the forced. This kind of marriage is actually being demanded by the armed groups to come for to ask marriage from a Kurdish girl, mainly from those marginalized families who are unable to defend themselves, whether they are, of course, subject to whether to accept this marriage or to leave. So this is one of the practices that has been actually is currently going on since. It's so sad that now the situation is of women is the worst among all the areas inside Syria under the de facto authorities. So I know that I have no time left, but if you have any questions, I'm
Unfortunately.
ready to
I'm
answer.
afraid we're already running over time, but I think it's also important to remind our audience that there are no good faith actors practically in Syria. I mean, starting with the regime itself, of course, which has treated its own citizens criminally.
Recording stopped.
At the root of all of this. But in any case, I want to thank all of you because what you're doing is terribly important because you're recording history. So thank you very much to all of you.
شكرا عمرين.
Thank you.
شكرا جميعا.
I think you stopped it before I had the chance to end the panel, or are we still live? I'm sorry, I'm a bit confused.
I think the recording is off, but maybe the panel is still.
Recording in progress.
Oh, okay. I was slightly confused, but once again, I just want to thank everybody for the very important work. I mean, on one level, we're a bit sort of pessimistic that, you know, the pursuit for justice may be vain in the immediate term, but it's so important to have the truth recorded objectively, thoroughly, consistently. So that's what you all are doing, and that's really terribly important. So again, thank you to Human Rights Watch, to STJ, sorry, and to Synergy for their very important work and for organizing this panel, and to all of you speakers today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
شكرا عمرين. شكرا سوريون. شكرا تآزر. شكرا لكل
Thank you, all of you.
Thank you.